This is the Sales Babble Podcast, episode 242, How to Build a Relationship with the Game Cards Against Mundanity, an interview with Jason Troy.
Welcome to Sales Babble, the podcast that shares selling secrets for non-sellers. And now your host, Pat Helmers.
Hello, Sales Babblers. This is Pat Helmers. And have you ever heard that people only buy from those they know, like, and trust? Well, for the most part, I've found this to be true. But how do you get people to trust you when you don't really know them? Today's guest is Jason Troy. He's an executive coach and author of the book Social Wealth. And today he's going to talk about a team-building game that he calls Cards Against Mundanity. Jason uses this game to ask deep questions that'll kickstart the conversations and quickly build a relationship. Now, I've been selling for a long time, and I kind of naturally ask these questions, but not everybody knows how to do it like I do. If you're struggling to connect with people, you're going to love this episode. So, with no further ado, let's get to it. Welcome, Jason. Are you ready to babble?
I'm ready to babble.
Okay, Jason, one of your folks reached out to me the other day, and if I remember right, you are a team builder, right? You work with all kinds of executives, business executives, and you try to build teams that are strong and powerful and bring the organizations forward, right?
Yes.
But the thing I think that's most interesting with you was this game you have called Cards Against Mundanity. What the heck is that?
Well, about 3 years ago, I started to really want to understand why are high-performing teams that high-performing, and why can't organizations scale those people, right? And I had a premise that not only was it about the internal performance, meaning how you're doing at a certain company, but it's also the ability to build third-party relationships with people, right, with clients and prospects. And I figured that there has to be a way to operationalize this where anyone can take this and do it in a consistent fashion to get extraordinary results and go to their engagements rather than having haphazard. And so I just set out on a journey to try to understand why this was a massive challenge. People haven't figured it out.
This is a real issue. Because I've seen this in startups that I've worked in, startups I've worked with. Yep. And in fact, I'm actually experiencing it right now.
Yes. And I think there's a whole host of issues that go along with that and challenges and things that now are significantly different than, let's say, 20, 30, 40 years ago that make it much more challenging for an individual to be successful internally and externally. And I think that one of the problems is there's a lot of FUD out there and people really don't know what to do. And there's a lot of myths and backing out of success. So people keep it in a mythology state rather than giving someone, if you do these things, you will be significantly better performing and higher performing than other people.
But you've kind of avoided my question, though. The thing that made you cool was this interesting game. What's this game about?
So the game is really about getting teams together to self-disclose information and learn about each other in a very personal way. Because what I found is the highest performing teams know each other extremely well, like best friends or family members or whatever it may be, because they have been extremely vulnerable with each other. And vulnerability builds the highest levels of trust, and it also builds caring. And when people care about you, they'll do anything for you, and they'll help you without having any stakes in the outcome, right? So what I mean by that is that people in your organization will help you on a sales deal because they want you to do well, not because they have any percentage in your deal. Your clients will go to bat for you and do anything, or a prospect will do anything to close a deal because they trust you and know that you have their best interest at heart. So you have all these people working and helping you, so it will give you a leg up. And so what this game does is it speeds up the trust building process from years or decades into minutes.
So I'm guessing it's some kind of a card game, but I think about all the kind of like team building things I've done through the years, and quite frankly, how lame many of them have been.
Yeah. No.
when in reality, I kind of felt like, guys, if we could just spend more time, it's just some kind of focus time just to chat and kind of get to know each other better.
Exactly.
As opposed to having this silly facilitation, maybe I would feel better about it, especially with people from long distances. Because I've worked in a number of organizations where people live far away, sometimes across an ocean.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly true. And I think people don't want to small talk; they want to have really meaty conversations. And I'll give you a prime example. In the first group I started doing this. So what happens in a group is it doesn't matter how large the group is. I usually split them into groups of 6 to 8. And if there's 100 people, the benefits accrue across everyone. And what happens is there are questions that are vulnerable questions, right? Like, tell me the most important lesson you've learned in the last year, right? What's one thing you're most grateful for in your life? Questions like that enable people to really share and open up who they are without having to have all of the small talk in order to get there. It's sort of like jumping in the deep end. And one of the first instances I had was I was in an organization where 2 women were pivotal people in a group, and they were essentially arch enemies. They hated each other, and it was killing the performance, not only of the team, but of the organization as a whole, because this is a very strategic part of the company. And so I got them in a group, and we were playing questions, and one of the questions happened to be, tell me about the most significant loss you've had in the last 5 years of your life. And one of the women said their dog, and one said their mother. And most people would say, well, that's not even close. But they bonded over the emotion of loss. And when you can bond at that level, you start to see people in a different way. You drop the stories and you drop your armor and you see them as human beings. And what happened was I saw them walk out of the group and have a conversation. And I found out they went to lunch that week. And then 30 days later, they were actually friends. And that friendship now helped that organization grow significantly. And the performance went all up because now the drama and problems and issues were gone and they were actually helping each other because now they saw each other as just 2 people rather than all the stories they've been making up.
Cool. Very cool. I like that. That's very believable.
And that's what happens, right?
Yeah.
And the problem, and what you're mentioning, and the problem with all the rest of these games and things. So let's just take something like doing a trust fall, right?
Ugh.
Or doing some ropes course.
Yeah.
Well, here's the problem. So we go out in the park, and let's say everyone listening here goes with you and me out there and does that, and we all have a fun time. Well, that we get to know each other, but not in a self-disclosure. I don't really get to know them. It's a false sense of doing that because, yeah, I'm catching you when you fall or I'm going through something tough, but it's the part of me sharing who I am and my experiences and emotions is what bonds us. So that's like a multi-step process. That's way more. But if you do it in the beginning, it's 1 step. So that's the problem. It's a lot more work and it's much more haphazard because in the trust exercise, now what's happening is they're now creating an environment where we have to have that conversation in order to really get to know each other to speed up that process. Because just doing things with someone is not enough. It's the talking about the experience itself is what makes it special and moves the trust along, right? I mean, just think about anything you've done with anyone that's an experience. You don't go to a wedding and people put on headphones and you can't hear anything or talk to anyone and walk out. There would be nothing there. It's having conversations with people and talking to them is what makes it joyful and meaningful.
I love that.
Right. So it's the same thing in sales, right? I mean, if you're working with a client or prospect, I mean, everyone I know that I talk to says they have a great relationship. And I'm like, how? Well, and I said, well, tell me about this great client or prospect. They'll tell me personal information or deep information about the engagement that they've learned. And then I said, well, tell them about a client that is not that great. And then they won't know that much information or they're far less detailed about all what's going on. And I'm like, well, yeah, because if you know more about them, it's easier for them to trust you because you're just farther in the engagement. and you know more about what's going on, and you show them that you care because you're asking deep questions and more fully engaged. And I said, well, of course it's better.
This is the situation you get in sometimes, Jason, is that sometimes people just don't want to divulge a whole lot, and they're actually doing it in a mindful manner. They kind of want to keep people at arm's length
Yes.
for one reason or another. And despite your best efforts, you can never break through.
I agree. That's why I love playing this game. Because if I went out and asked someone, right, because I did this initially because I was trying all these different things, not only to see what worked right, but what would work wrong. And so I asked people questions. I just went up to them, and these were strangers, not just people that I knew or that I was telling to. And I'd ask them a question early on. So tell me about the most important lesson you've learned in the last year. Or I'd ask them a really vulnerable question. And then I ask them, well, I'm doing I'm doing a project. And when I ask you that question, if I'm a complete stranger, which I am, like, what are you going through your head? And people would say to me things like, oh, I wondered why you asked me that question. That seems kind of out of the blue. That seems like a very deep question that may pry information out of me, and I felt very defensive. And I realized that. But then when I started to go out and tell people I had a game, and I asked the exact same question at the exact same inflection point, I got no pushback. Because one, when we've all loved to play games, and we played games like a little kid, so it puts us back in that state of mind. Two, I named the game after Cards Against Humanity, so it would ground people in something that they knew would be fun. And then three, people want to share. You just have to give them a way to do it. And so often in those instances, I would just start by saying to me, if they pause, well, here's a lesson I've learned. And I would make it really short. And then by me being vulnerable, it showed them that I could open up and make it safe for them to share. So by having the conduit of the game, it gets around people's objections, and they can't really focus on why they aren't telling you stuff. They just start talking.
I like that. That's actually even not in a team building space, but just in a sales space. That's what great salespeople do, right? When they're trying to qualify people.
We talked about that last. I mean, that's exactly what they do, right? And that's how they qualify. Exactly, right? They have these conversations about this. This is just one way, right? The way that I'm doing it through the game is a conduit for people to utilize that to get around. But ultimately, it's about getting people to self-disclose whatever it is that would work for you and how you go about it. But you have to get to that point and have it be something that can consistently work at a very high rate in order for it to work the way that it should.
Very, very interesting. When does this work best and when does it work worst?
I've never really seen it work. I mean, if I were going to go and do this, and I've had people do this, and maybe it'll work at different parts of the engagement, but often when people do this in a sales, when it's a prospect, I tell them to ask it towards the end. Because that way they lead people, they play a few rounds of the game, they can go back and forth if it's one-on-one, and lead people in a really good place with them. With a client, you could do it at any point if you know them. I mean, you got to pick something, and I would do it in person, obviously, as much as possible, rather than the phone.
Right.
In those engagements, right? If you're in a team, you can do it virtually. I try to, as much as, one personal touch as I can. I think they would work really well in almost any instance. I'm trying to think of it. Time it wouldn't work. I think probably a person in their gut would know when it wouldn't work well, and I would say go with that.
But I want to be super clear here to the audience, though, because you and I had chatted some about this before, was that you actually play this with prospects. Yeah.
So what I would do, and this is what I tell people to do, and it works exceptionally well, is if you're at the end of the prospect, you're talking to them saying, I'd love to get to know the people that I'm working with or potentially working with. And, that also helps me just do a better job. And so I got this game that I'd love to play with people. It's called Cards Against Mundanity, blah, blah, blah. Would you mind playing a few rounds? It's just a question and answer game. And they'll say, yeah, of course. They always say yes. And then you just whip it out and you play a couple, of the cards. And obviously you can take out whatever you want, right? Or you can put it on your phone or take out the PDF. You don't even need to actually print it out or do anything. and they'll just do it. And you just go back and forth and play maybe 2 questions, maybe 3. You could even play more if you want, right? I mean, sometimes I've had some people say that in a prospect, these people want to keep playing because they get to share and talk about their favorite subject themselves. And they get to learn about you. And so it's a different engagement process, and then you leave it, right? If you have a client itself, you could just do this at any point in time, right? And get to know them significantly better, because that means it'll be harder for them to unhook from you because they'll start to really like you and trust you and know you as a person.
What's an example of where you've used this with a prospect and how did it turn out?
Yeah, trying to think of where so I have a company here that does small and medium sized businesses to close them in the transportations and logistics business. And some of the people have used it to call on small business owner, right? And as they've gone over there and gone through their sales process in person, they've actually just taken it out. Some people have printed it. Some people have used it on their laptop or iPad and just literally asked them. And every person that I know that has used it have all said they love doing it. And it gets them over the hump of having to worry about building a high level rapport on their own when they have to make the first engagement, because they know at the end, even if they can't, this will help get them over the hump. And they tell me that it's helping them close the deal, and it's helping them close the deal faster because they're getting to know these people. And some of the information is really useful in the process, right? Someone told me that they found out that, I mean, I love running marathons. And so I've just started doing it. And one of my clients told me that they found out the other person was a big runner and they were running by themselves. So he invited them out to the running group they had. And after going out for like 2 weeks, the person just signed the deal much faster. They had actually kicked out the vendor they had in there and put them in there specifically because they're like, well, if someone's going to care and do all this about me, like I'd want them on my team. And it's literally how they phrased it.
This matters to people. This matters when people are making buying decisions. Do they trust you? Do they feel like that are you representing me as best as possible compared to all the other people out there?
Yeah, because they know when it hits the fan that odds are you're going to be there. And the other part of it is that for the person who's doing it on the other side, like the salespeople who use it, I've also noticed something that they told me is true, that they care more about the prospect, which then what they've told me is that they have more skin in the game to make that person successful because they care more and they don't want to see them fail. So it actually helps them be more accountable, because it's hard for them, I guess, unless you don't have any emotions, right? Or are a narcissist, sociopath, or psychopath, possibly then this wouldn't work. But if you're not one of those 3, it would. So it's really interesting to see that this is a vested interest and actually good for both sides to do this. It's not just for, you're trying to get something. You're actually going to deliver something, and it's going to bring the best out of you, which in the long term is going to make you much better at doing your job and much more successful. So there's a lot of ways why this is in your vested interest to want to do things like this. It's just hard for people because I think the problem is we've learned all our life from people that once we trust people, we can be vulnerable. But it's actually the opposite. We have to be vulnerable in order to gain trust.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it happens all the time. That's why you see people who open up to people and share something. They get people to buy in much quicker, right? Or share something that they may be failing or not as good at, right? That also then allows people to share those things, and then they don't have to feel like they're perfect. So all this stuff people who's listening have done, right? I think it's making it more conscious, so you realize that it makes a significant difference in the process, whether you're trying to get a prospect or you have a client, in order to do this. And it's simple, and it's going to make your job way easier because they're going to work with you much more. They're not going to scream at you as much and be as upset. because you're someone that they care about and you care about them. So it's going to make you happier, more successful, and more fulfilled in the process.
As I said at the top of the interview, that you're an executive coach. If people wanted to find you, Jason, where would they go?
They go to my website. It's Jason, and the last name is treu.com. That's Jason, treu.com.
In this cool game that you have?
Yeah, they go to cardsagainstmundanity.com. That's cardsagainstmundanity.com, and you can download the game for free, and there's instructions, and there's an FAQ, and there's, everything that you need to actually get this out and to play it and use it, and there's nothing you need to buy or do, and right, and it's simple, and it's simple. It's really doing what you're doing right now.
It sounds like fun. I think this is like a very fun thing.
Yeah, I mean, I have people do this personally too with people, but I roll out a professional way, and I think that it makes your job much more fun. And it gets you to know the people around you, right? And the other thing about it, which is helpful too, which I've had some salespeople do as well, which has been extremely powerful, is that they've gotten to know clients and prospects really well and their ins and outs, and they've actually made introductions. So they have emailed and put them together for networking or business stuff because they know some deep things about them where they'll get along, which will enhance the chances that they actually would want to get together and talk to each other, not just about business, but about personal things.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Jason, thank you very much for visiting us here at Sales Babble. This has been really, really fun, and it's not been mundane whatsoever.
Thanks.
So to connect with Jason and to get a copy of his card game, Cards Against Mundanity, you can go to the show notes at www.salesbabble.com/242. While you're on the website, you may have noticed there's some changes in there. I've made it very easy for you to find past episodes of the podcast by topic, or you can find them in order very easily. Lots of great information there, the entire back catalog. I've had a number of people reach out to me, say they've been digging into it, and there's really some great stuff. I can't believe it. I think I've been doing this a little over 4 years, so where does the time go? If you got a question, if you got a comment, click the Babble Me button. I'd be happy to help you out. I've been chatting with some people, some listeners on LinkedIn this week, and that's been an awful lot of fun. And it really means a lot to me if I can that you're finding value in the podcast. That is all I've got for this week. Until next week, take care and have a highly successful and a profitable selling day.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Babble podcast. Find us at www.salesbabble.com.